Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
After a 28-year-old man murdered 50 people at two mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand on Friday, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and President Donald Trump spoke on the phone.
He asked what offer of support the United States could provide. My message was sympathy and love for all Muslim communities. He acknowledged that and agreed.
If Donald Trump has offered the Muslim community that sympathy and love, however, we have not seen it. While Prime Minister Ardern made it a point to put on hijab, go comfort grieving families, Trump tweeted that, quote, "We stand in solidarity with New Zealand." But that's hardly unusual for this president who, from the start of his rise in politics, has played a sort of wink-wink, nudge-nudge game with white nationalists and supremacists, such that the New Zealand shooter, while saying he doesn't agree with Trump's policies, still wrote in his manifesto he saw the president as, quote, "a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose." Wrote that before murdering 50 Muslims in their mosques. Now Democrats are calling out Donald Trump's behavior more than ever before. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for example, tweeting, quote, "What the president is saying here, if you engage in violent acts of white supremacy, I will look the other way." Here to talk about what's going on, NBC News reporter Ben Collins and New York Times contributing writer Wajahat Ali. Waj, it's not that the president has, done anything to praise what happened, obviously, and he gave a kind of peremptory tweet about it. But what do you make of the sort of notable silence from him in the wake of this massacre?
It's the feature, not the bug. Let's not forget when it came to Charlottesville, when there were white supremacists, KKK, and the alt-right who repeated the white supremacist conspiracy theory, the Jews will not replace us. Donald Trump responded by saying they're very fine people and both sides are to blame. And when it's come to this terrorist attack in New Zealand, which has claimed 50 lives, including a 3-year-old baby, it's been 5 days, Chris, and Donald Trump has yet to use the T word, terrorism, to describe it. In fact, he has yet to reach out to the victims. In fact, I wish he had half as much concern for the rest of Americans, including Muslims, that he does in defending Judge Pirro, who promoted anti-Muslim conspiracy theories that are found in the same ideological swamp shared by these white supremacists around the world. I wish he would attack the #1 domestic terror threat in America, according to the FBI, which are white supremacists, the #1 source of domestic terror plots in the past 10 years, with as much gusto and passion that he attacked John McCain, the press, S&L, and Robert Mueller, but he has not done that, and he hasn't done it throughout his presidency. And I'll say something bold here. It's because I think, Chris, Donald Trump is racist. Yeah. He's not racially charged or racially motivated or has racial flare-ups. He's a racist, and he has promoted and mainstreamed a white supremacist conspiracy theory to win the midterm elections, which was that George Soros was funding the caravan, the invasion. The same language used, by the way, by the Australian terrorist who killed 50 people last week.
In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the president used the word invasion even after the murders.
On Friday.
He used it on Friday to describe immigration in the United States in front of cameras. Ben, cover sort of corners of the internet that are steeped in explicit white national and white supremacy.
Yes.
What is the relationship between the kind of ways in which the president just sort of refuses to come out and condemn them often, and how they view Trump and Trump as a kind of icon for them?
So now we see two straight terrorists that have done this sort of wink and nod to Trump, saying basically, yeah, all of that rhetoric is right about invaders. Both of them reference invaders. Both,
You're talking about the synagogue
shooter, back in October, right before midterms, and this shooter in New Zealand as well. But both of them said, he's not going far enough. Like, why isn't he doing something about all of this stuff that he's talking about, right? And when you read his tweets, there is this fever pitch. It does seem like every day it's like the vitriol is even more and more. So when people come together and spend their entire day trying to decipher these tweets, there are conspiracy theorists that do it in one way, and there are regular people that do it in another. But when these people sort of get driven down these algorithmic rabbit holes to over and over again hear these messages and say, like, some of them go even further and say, hey, the race war is coming. That's what I'm reading into this. The race war is coming. So why doesn't somebody do something about it is what they're thinking. And that's really where, people on 8chan and 4chan, that's how they get egged on to carry out these attacks.
There was something said this weekend. I mean, it's such a good point, Watch, that this, that language, the invaders' language, which is the language that the synagogue shooter used as well. When he's talking about the caravan, it's the language that this man uses as well, right? Like, we, the pure white Gentiles, are being invaded by them, the Jewish or Muslim other. This is what Mick Mulvaney said this weekend, which I thought was just, I had to pick my jaw off the floor. I want you to respond to, Watch. Take a listen.
You've seen the president stand up for religious liberties, individual liberties. The president is not a white supremacist. I'm not sure how many times we have to say that.
He also, I think, said the president's not an Islamophobe or has no bigotry against Muslims. It really feels like gaslighting.
It's 2019. You can't gaslight me, because I remember the president saying, I think Islam hates us. I remember the president asking for a total and complete ban on Muslims until we can figure out what the hell is going on. I remember the president saying that he saw a tape on television of Muslims celebrating the 9/11 terror attacks. And I double dare you, President Trump. I'm calling you out. You said you saw the tape of Muslims celebrating in New Jersey of the 9/11 terror attacks. Show me the tape. Yeah. So this is a president who's anti-Muslim. This is a president, again, I want to say this, Chris. He mainstreamed a white supremacist talking point in October. The Jews, led by George Soros, a Jewish Hungarian American, funding the caravan of rapists, criminals, Muslims, and Mexicans. That is exactly the number one conspiracy theory of white supremacists, that the rest of us are being used by the Jews to weaken the white race, which was used by the shooter who killed 50 people last week. You got to call him out, and you got to call out the Republican leaders who also mainstreamed it. That includes Kevin McCarthy. Call them all out and ask them, do you stand by President Trump's use of that white supremacist conspiracy theory?
It is Wednesday, the 20th of March of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. What a great way to bring in the spring equinox, huh? Hey, I got some little buds coming out on some of the trees and hedges around the property. It was quite lovely, and some flowers have actually popped up as well. So spring has sprung, and I'm ready for it, indeed. Oh, wow. Hey, Devin Nunes's cow now has more followers than Devin Nunes. Just goes to show. I guess they're going to have to change that term from the Streisand effect to the Nunes effect. But there's so much baggage on the Nunes effect, people might get a little confused, like, oh, well, what do you mean? The lawsuit against Twitter and some parody accounts? Or do you mean the effect of Nunes not recusing himself when he was chair of the Intel Committee? Or any other number of things that could be considered the Nunes effect? Well, I still like it, though. It's such a little piece of news. It really doesn't mean much. But I think it's emblematic of, well, the abject insanity of the GOP. There's no other way to explain it. And you could blame the Russians, but I would say that the abject insanity of the GOP predated entreaties by the Russians to get a grip on the throat of America. And you just knew it would be the GOP that would turn us over to them. You just knew it. They're a bunch of, they just don't know how to lead. They know how to obstruct, and they're the perfect soldiers for a hostile foreign power. All right, well, what's on the rest of the menu here today? Because that was a little bit of a longish clip at the top. That we really have to come to this final understanding. And we should act upon this and just come out and not let Trump and the GOP leadership get away with just straightforward racism and anti-Semitic tropes. It's just endless, and they get away with it. They're not called out. Trump needs to be called for the racist he is, and these anti-Semitic tropes for what they are. And they need to be addressed to the Senate and Congress Republicans as well. I don't care if this call that, Pompeo put out that he's taking a call, but only from religious leaders. The regular White House press corps was not allowed because it was a faith-based call. And apparently it was with Christian and Jewish leaders. And some would say, the administration's not anti-Semitic. Well, get out of here. Pompeo is an apocalyptic believer. He wants the rapture. He thinks the apocalypse is what's going to free us so that we can float to heaven and all the others will be sent to hell. And this tokenizing the Jewish population, the Jewish people, and patronizing, just the sick patronizing. It's so transparent. And I know that there's a lot of right-wing Israelis and American Jewish people as well that might find some of this administration's authoritarian tactics just right up their alley. But anti-Semitism is another driving force in this administration. They're white nationalists, let's be clear. They'll use people for their own evil means, and I hate the term evil. I really don't believe in it. Except now, I don't know, it really explains a lot with this administration. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Though the New Zealand terrorist invoked Donald Trump, he was also inspired by ideas that have circulated for decades on the French far right. Yeah, Marine Le Pen and her dad didn't just come out of a vacuum. A multi-partisan coalition of German legislatures is calling for the expulsion of the U.S. ambassador from the country for being too much of a Nazi. Wow. The U.S. ambassador is too much of a Nazi for the Germans. Get out. And the U.S. is killing civilians with impunity in a secret shadow war in Somalia. There's a lot going on, and we can juggle all of these. We're Democrats. After the break, we then move to the chef's table where the Trump administration is holding children as young as 9 years old in black site icebox baby gulags without telling their lawyers. Well, if they're in black site icebox baby gulags, by definition, the lawyers are not going to be allowed to know. Jeez. Every Nazi knows that. And the Trump team has lost 63 court cases in 2 years because they're being so nuts, that's in quotes, while not doing their homework, which is also in quotes, on the basics of governing. Because Trump ran a small family mobbed up business, and he's used to just saying, this is what I want, and things get done. He's not used to to following the law. Let's be clear. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page, is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the page, from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the contribute button, and please do become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. Your recurring contribution goes a long way because we're able to stretch in ways that people wouldn't normally know how to stretch. But we've learned well, and your generosity has helped us keep this powerhouse of resistance resisting as the founders originally intended. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom, for taking care of that. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I take care of that. And I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. And I get the links on social media up in that little window before showtime. So look out for that. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts a few hours later by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, YouTube, iHeart, and really wherever podcasts can be found. Indeed. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of Foreign Policy magazine, and it is written by Sasha Polikow-Saransky and Sarah Wildman. When white nationalists gathered in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017, chanting, "They will not replace us," and "the Jews will not replace us," few of the assembled extremists knew where those slogans had come from. By contrast, Brenton Tarrant, the 28-year-old Australian, oops, I said his name, damn it. Excuse me. That guy, the 28-year-old Australian, accused of shooting dead, well, now it's up to 53 worshipers, and more are on the cusp, sadly. Many are still in very serious and intensive care. And 3 more have passed since this article came out here late Monday. And they were shot at 2 mosques and wounding dozens more in Christchurch, New Zealand. And he was more explicit when it came to his intellectual inspirations. In the 74-page manifesto he posted before the rampage, he praises the Norwegian mass murderer Anders Behring Breivik and draws on his work while noting his admiration for the interwar British fascist Oswald Mosley. But French ideas figure most prominently in Tarrant's thinking. Well, of course, when you go to France, especially Paris, they'll let you know that they are the center of the universe, and they won't let you forget it, especially if you bring up New York. Well, I would say that Paris has a good argument, but let's get back to this article. Now, this 28-year-old terrorist cites watching invaders at a shopping mall during a visit in an eastern French town as the moment of epiphany when he realized he would resort to violence. You know what's weird? When I was in eastern French towns, my epiphany was how wonderful, I mean, as bad as colonization was, and the terrible effects of it resonate still. I look at the world here. The whole world is here. That's what I loved about San Francisco. It's the whole world. My epiphany wasn't, oh man, I got to kill all these people because, I don't know, there's too much color here. Jeez. All right. Well, he appears to have written his manifesto drawing on the work of the French anti-immigration writer Renaud Camus, including plagiarizing the title of his book, Le Grand Replacement. And that's the grand, or the great replacement. A phrase that has become commonplace in European immigration debates and a favorite of far-right politicians across Europe, including the Netherlands Get-Wilders, and a group of younger far-right activists who call themselves identitarians. Oh, do you now? All right. Well, wait till you find out about Asimov's Foundation, and we'll see what your identitarianism does to you. Although this terrorist seems eager to give Camus credit, the French writer pushed back against those insisting that he acknowledged that his ideas may have inspired the carnage. None of these people ever take credit for it. They want to distance themselves. Oh, no, I was just writing. I'm not responsible for what people do with my ideas. They're just floating out there in the world and in the ether, and people just pick them up, and I'm not responsible. Of course he's not. But the accused killer's manifesto echoes Camus's writing in many ways, most notably in the fear of demographic erasure, by which a new population replaces an existing one. That's why we hear all this stuff about white genocide. They're adding color to my white. Oh, no. Yeah, well, we're adding some of that white to our color, too. How do you think we might be feeling? The accused killer claims his goal was to show the invaders that our lands will never be their lands. I know, because you're incapable of wrapping your head around the idea that this is like our lands together. Yes, it is. And we can be good neighbors doing it. And really gets right down to the idea and the belief that the right really cannot be good neighbors. And they'll kill you for it. Next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, is out of alternate by Noor Al-Sabai. German politicians are calling for the expulsion of Trump-appointed UN Ambassador Richard Grenell over his alleged interference in the country's politics. Now, of course, Trump appointed Grenell when he was UN ambassador to be the ambassador of Germany. The Financial Times reported yesterday, and that would be Tuesday, of course, that figures across the German political spectrum have criticized Grenell for his comments about the country's defense spending budget. Grenell, like Donald Trump, regularly condemns Germany for the small size of its military budget amid NATO spending targets. Because a mobster thinks that this is a protection racket. Literally. I mean, we all talked about, government is just a protection racket. It's a little bit more than a protection racket. All right? It can be a protection racket, or it can be a representative democratic republic. In a tweet on Monday, the U.S. Embassy in Berlin echoed the president, saying Germany reducing its already unacceptable commitments to military readiness is a worrisome sign to Germany's 28 NATO allies. Well, that's very nice. Grenell decided, and his team decided to tweet that out. Wolfgang Kubicki, the Speaker of Germany's Bundestag and Vice President of the Free Democratic Party, called on the German Foreign Minister to declare Richard Grenell persona non grata immediately. If a U.S. diplomat acts like a high commissioner of an occupying power, Kubicki added, we will have to learn that our tolerance, or he will have to learn that our tolerance has its limits. Carsten Schneider, the parliamentary manager of the Social Democrats Party, said Grinnell is a total diplomatic failure who was acting like a brat. I think he's acting like a Nazi. This entire thing seems like the behavior of a naughty schoolboy, Schneider said. With his repeated clumsy provocations, Mr. Grinnell is damaging the transatlantic relationship. Now, the Financial Times noted that since Grinnell assumed the ambassadorship in 2018, he has claimed he wants to empower conservative movements across Europe, threatened sanctions over a pipeline Germany backed, and urged German companies to cease operations in Iran. Well, look, the Germans kicking the U.S. ambassador out of the country for being too much of a Nazi is just proof that white supremacy is no big deal. It is only a few guys with very serious problems that Trump really, really likes. Final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is Out of Alternate by Ian Higgins. Amnesty International is accusing the U.S. of waging a shadow air war in Somalia that is killing civilians with abandon. Amnesty International issued its findings on the African war last night, Tuesday, in a report titled The Hidden U.S. War in Somalia, and it is available on PDF. The U.S. has been covertly engaging in conflicts in Somalia for decades, but in April of 2017, the Trump administration upped airstrikes and attacks targeted at the rebel group Al-Shabaab. Now, of course, we know Al-Shabaab is the group that kidnapped all those schoolgirls, and many of them have not been able to be released or escape. So we're not talking about, a really good group that is being bombed with impunity here. Let's be clear. What we're talking about is, just collateral damage in a shithole country. They all look the same. And eventually they're going to hate that you're doing it. They're going to come to kill you to stop it. So you got to kill them first so you don't have to stop it. I guess that's the reasoning. The human rights group studied 5 of more than 100 strikes in Somalia over the past 2 years and found that 14 civilians were killed in the attacks. 8 others were injured. These 5 incidents were carried out with the Reaper drones and manned aircraft in Lower Shabelle, Amnesty said in a press release, a region largely under Al-Shabaab control outside the Somali capital of Mogadishu. The U.S. military denied to Amnesty that any civilians have been killed as a result of American operations in Somalia. Now, we know in Afghanistan, wedding parties are a particularly lovely target for drone strikes, and clear days are not clear for the people expecting to be able to walk to their wedding, because they will become targets. That amount of people as a group are obviously a threat. And the drone's algorithm says, kill them all. So much for Asimov's rules for robots. Now, Amnesty is calling for an official government investigation into the killings and airstrikes and urging people to add their name to a petition to Congress to force action. Ella Knight, an Amnesty researcher concentrating on military, security, and police, said that pushing for oversight is key. I mean, after all, in this reporter's opinion, we are a representative democratic republic. That's what representative democratic republics do. She continued, the U.S. government must ensure investigations into all credible allegations of civilian casualties are carried out with accountability for those responsible for violations and reparation made to the victims and survivors. Now, the mission doesn't end with U.S. and Somalia accountability, Knight added. She argued that it is the responsibility of both governments to make it easier and safer for communities affected by the war to publicly acknowledge civilian casualties. Both the U.S. and the Somali governments need to put an end to this lack of transparency and must do more to enable affected communities to self-report civilian casualties, she said. Without this, justice is likely to remain elusive. And this justice concurs. Let's get to our break now. And when we come back from that break, we will be going through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Jim Daly. That strange sound? It's Earth's magnetosphere, the magnetic field created by the movement of the iron core deep within the planet. The magnetosphere is a shield, protecting us from dangerous cosmic rays, and it vibrates like a drum when jets of charged particles from the sun, called plasma, crash into it. The theory describing this phenomenon was developed in the 1970s, but it wasn't until recently that we had the tools to observe it. In 2007, NASA launched 5 satellites to study the magnetosphere in a mission called Time History of Events and Macroscale Interactions During Substorms, or THEMIS.
We ended up making use of all 5 NASA THEMIS probes back very early in the mission, actually, when they were almost in a perfectly straight line.
Martin Archer, professor of physics and astronomy at Queen Mary University of London.
And that was really ideal for trying to tease apart exactly what happens when something impulsive hits our magnetosphere. So basically what happened in this particular event is really quite simple. You had a jet of plasma travelling very fast that impacted on the magnetopause. That's the boundary of our magnetosphere. That then sent out ripples in all directions. Now, some of those will then travel towards the north and southern poles and get reflected back. And it's the interference of the original and reflected waves that allows these standing waves to form, very much like the surface of a drum. And that gives it a very well-defined frequency.
Archer's team converted the signals collected by the probes into audio that we can hear. They published the discovery in the journal Nature Communications.
From the theory behind these drum-like oscillations, we know that they should have a big effect. They should penetrate our magnetic shield quite far, causing motions within regions where there are the radiation belts, for instance. Certainly, we saw perturbations on the ground in the magnetic field, and that tells us that the ionosphere is moving as well, just in the same way as the boundary is. So it's like one side of the magnetosphere is just all ringing because of this mode.
These events occur on a colossal scale. The magnetosphere extends outward about 10 times the diameter of the Earth. Archer's team has proposed that future studies look into ground-based sensing methods that can reveal more about the magnetosphere's behavior. Perhaps there's an important upside in better understanding our planetary shield. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Jim Daly.
This is a message from CDC.
After hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, standing water and excess moisture help mold grow in your home, garage, and other structures. When you return to a home that has been flooded, know that you're likely to have mold. Mold puts your family's health at risk. If you have mold growing in your home, you should clean it up and fix other water problems, such as leaks in roofs, walls, or plumbing. Keep your children and pets out of affected areas until you've cleaned. Control moisture in your home to prevent mold growth. To remove mold growth from hard surfaces, use commercial products, soap and water, or a bleach solution of no more than 1 cup of household laundry bleach in 1 gallon of water. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Never mix bleach with ammonia or other household cleaners. It will produce dangerous, toxic fumes. Open windows and doors to provide fresh air.
For more information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. And you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. Netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. 300 policemen waited outside the Bernard Schwartz cigar factory in Detroit, Michigan. They were there to break up the peaceful sit-down strike going on inside the cigar plant. During the winter and spring of 1937, Detroit had seen a wave of sit-down strikes. Some 35,000 workers sat down on the job for better pay and union recognition. Strikers ranged from the women who worked at Woolworths to the workers at the 6 General Motors plants. In all, 130 sites experienced a sit-down strike that year. That March, the mayor of Detroit ordered the strikers be forcibly removed. The sheriff asked for 600 special deputies to assist with the brutal crackdown. And so it was today in labor history that under the fictitious claim that an unattended boiler was ready to explode, that the Detroit police burst into the Bernard Schwartz plant. It was later revealed that the assistant boiler operator was actually inside and part of the strike. As police stormed the plant, they were met with fierce resistance from the workers inside. For 15 minutes, the police battled floor by floor with strikers. Many of them were women, armed with wooden cigar molds that they used to attempt to repel the police. In the end, the strikers were overwhelmed. Outside, 40 mounted policemen rode down the 500 picketers that surrounded the building. That day, the police also evicted sit-down strikers at the Newton packing plant and several shoe stores. On March 24th, a rally of 200,000 people in Cadillac Square was held to protest the police tactics. It was there that the UAW's Victor Reuther threatened a 2-for-1, 2 new sit-downs for every 1 eviction. The sit-down strikes showed the willpower of labor and were a key tactic in union organization in Detroit and across the United States.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Special counsel Robert Mueller's office on Tuesday asked a federal judge for a deadline extension. This in response to a request to unseal court documents in Paul Manafort's case due to the press of other work. In other words, they're really busy this week. And new disclosures in the probe may explain Trump's recent Twitter freakout. CNN has more.
Hundreds of pages of newly unsealed warrants revealing today that the special counsel's team was allowed to pore over years of Michael Cohen's emails and online data from his time working for Donald Trump. Robert Mueller targeted Cohen, the president's former lawyer and fixer, soon after his appointment as special counsel in May 2017. Investigators dug into Cohen's Gmail account as far back as 2015 as they searched for evidence of illegal foreign lobbying, money laundering, and other crimes. The FBI raided Cohen's properties in April 2018. Cohen later pleaded guilty in a Manhattan courthouse to making an illegal campaign contribution and other crimes. In the new batch of documents, details of the campaign finance scheme stretching almost 20 pages are completely redacted, a signal that the investigation into hush money payments to two women who alleged affairs with Donald Trump remains ongoing.
A federal jury found Monsanto's Roundup, the most widely used chemical weed killer in the world, was a, quote, substantial factor in causing cancer in a 70-year-old man. This is the second case linking Roundup and cancer that's been brought to court, but there are literally thousands more cases awaiting trial. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, was classified in 2015 as probably carcinogenic to humans. Bayer, which bought Monsanto in 2018, says it believes Monsanto's conduct has been appropriate and it ultimately won't be held liable. Time magazine is reporting that Donald Trump has taken increased control of negotiations over North Korea's nuclear weapons program, sidelining his own top negotiator and dismissing the warnings of top intelligence and foreign policy advisors in the wake of last month's failed summit in Vietnam. The magazine reporting Trump continues to dismiss the conclusions of the CIA, state and defense departments, and other agencies that North Korea will not abandon its nuclear weapons program, continuing to insist that he and Kim can negotiate a deal. The Supreme Court delivered a brutal blow to immigrants' rights on Tuesday, ruling that the Trump administration may detain unauthorized immigrants indefinitely once they've been taken into criminal custody. Its 5-4 decision permits the government to arrest and imprison undocumented individuals who were released from custody years, even decades ago. Slate is reporting that even immigrants convicted in the distant past of a minor crime, like possession of a stolen bus transfer, may now be apprehended and detained without bond. The decision hands Immigration and Customs Enforcement even more power to terrorize immigrant communities, suspending due process for certain unauthorized immigrants snatched up by the agency. Floridians voted in November by a nearly 2-to-1 margin to allow former felons to vote. On Tuesday, the Florida House of Representatives Criminal Justice Subcommittee voted along party lines for what appears to be a poll tax. According to the bill, felons would first have to pay any outstanding fines and fees before regaining the right to vote, creating an insurmountable obstacle for thousands of people the amendment was meant to help. Florida's Amendment 4 requires the automatic restoration of voting rights to felons who have completed all terms of their sentence, including parole or probation. It excludes those convicted of murder or a felony sexual offense. Backers of the House bill say that fines and fees are part of the terms of their sentence, which must be completed for restoration of voting rights to take place. Donald Trump hosted Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro at the White House on Tuesday. For those unfamiliar with the man who's been dubbed Trump of the Tropics, the New York Times describes him as, quote, an echo of the American president, a brash nationalist whose populist appeal comes partly from his use of Twitter and his history of making crude statements about women, gay people, and indigenous groups. At their joint press conference, Trump said he was proud that Bolsonaro adopted the use of his fake news smear against the media. You think there's a different criminal justice system for the rich and connected? You're right.
After a public announcement charging Robert Kraft and 24 others with soliciting prostitution, word today, those charges could be dropped. The owner of the New England Patriots and the others now may never have to go to court if they accept a plea deal. In this letter prosecutors sent to each of the accused men, they would have to admit the evidence, including the videos taken, would have been enough to convict them. According to the deal, by agreeing to that, the accused can avoid misdemeanor convictions. But the accused won't escape punishment. The deal requires a course about prostitution dangers, sexually transmitted disease screening and treatment, 100 hours of community service, and a $5,000 fine. If Robert Kraft were to accept the deal, these requirements could double because he's accused of soliciting prostitution twice on different days.
And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. 3 days after Cyclone Idai dissipated off the coast of the African nation of Mozambique, rescue workers are only beginning to comprehend the full scale of the storm's damage, as wide swaths of the country remain inundated with floodwaters and entire cities remain cut off from one another. By one meteorological estimate, the cyclone's torrential rains, coastal flooding, and high winds make it one of the worst weather disasters to have ever hit the southern hemisphere, and on-the-ground assessments confirm that impression. Deborah Wang is a communications officer for the World Food Program and sent this update from Beira, Mozambique's fourth largest city, home to 500,000 people.
People said that 90% of the city has been destroyed. Everything is down. Trees are down. Electrical poles are down. It's a very apocalyptic scene.
Much less is known about conditions outside of major cities. The reports trickling back to aid coordinators are grim.
Entire villages outside of Beira are underwater. It looks like an inland ocean.
Days after rivers began to breach their banks, thousands of people still await evacuation from flood zones across Mozambique, as well as in neighboring Malawi and Zimbabwe. Rotafina Donko is the interim country director for Mozambique for the international aid group Oxfam.
People are on rooftops. They are also on trees, stones, and higher ground, waiting for rescue operations.
Mozambique's president estimates the death toll in his country alone could ultimately exceed 1,000, though with so many in need of assistance across inaccessible rural areas, that high estimate could ultimately prove conservative. And with heavy rainfall expected to continue across storm-affected areas through Thursday, it's likely an already historic natural disaster has yet to fully leave its mark. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid me of this priest? We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 51 degrees. We haven't seen an early morning temperature at that level for quite a while. So it is very pleasant. Seems balmy. We had some rain overnight, just a little bit in my neighborhood. I was watching the satellite radar images, and copious globs of rain were in the area, and it dropped almost 1/4 of an inch, but not here. In my little protected area where the mothership is, we didn't get a dropping, but we are expecting to get, something quite a bit less than 1/4, maybe 1/15 of an inch. Is that even a measurement? Later on this afternoon, winds are currently out of the southwest, southwest, light and variable, and then will be coming directly out of the south later on this afternoon and early evening at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Will remain at that clip tonight, and then we'll be shifting out of the west-southwest, and then light and variable tomorrow, also out of the west-southwest, I believe. And we should have daytime high of 66 to 68. Overnight lows in the upper 40s, low 50s. And tomorrow we're expected to be in the low to mid 60s. Ostensibly, we are supposed to get some rain tomorrow night, and quite a bit of rain through the rest of the week and through the weekend into next week, with, according to the forecast, not less than a quarter inch, and maybe up to almost 3/4 of an inch on a day or two. Well. So it looks like I've just had a refresh here, and it looks like I've got rain coming in just about 2 hours that we'll be bringing in actually closer to a quarter inch. All right. Pollen is rated at none. The air quality index is moderate. That's a cautionary moderate, by the way, 64 parts per million. Cautionary because those with breathing conditions should take care. There are people burning to stay warm, but not so much that the state and counties are allowing folks to burn their trash earlier in the hopes that we won't have such bad smoke and particulate matter later on in the year when they were burning the hell out of everything, plus the wildfires. All right. The daytime UV index is into that cautionary moderate range as well at 3. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.5. I'm sorry. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.55 inches. Visibility is down to 6 miles, and relative humidity is at 60%. Well, that's not rainy, but we are expected to get rain in just a couple of hours here. All right, weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 54 and cloudy. Paris is 57 and cloudy. Rome is 63 degrees and partly cloudy. Kiev is 48 and fair. Kabul is 45 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 71 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 59 degrees and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 71 degrees and also partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 51 degrees with rain, and they are expecting flood and mudslides, so be careful. And New York is quite balmy, 48 degrees Fahrenheit, and sunny. Oh, spring in New York. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Dan Desai Martin of Share Blue Media brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Not counting weather from around the world, of course. The Trump administration is jailing more than a dozen immigrant children, at least 5 clandestine facilities across the country, whose existence has not been made public until now. The previously unheard of practice may violate court mandates on how the U.S. government must treat immigrant children, and even more secret facilities like this could exist. While the minors were initially placed at known shelters, the reports that they were then transferred to off-the-books facilities that specialize in providing for youth with mental health and behavioral changes. Oh, my God. Behavioral problems? They're going to be sent to a behavioral sciences facility? Operant conditioning? Will there be shocks involved? There are at least 16 children being detained, some as young as 9 years old, in facilities in Arkansas, Florida, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, because they need jobs. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, otherwise known as ORR, the federal agency in charge of caring for immigrant children, never acknowledged the existence of these shelters, not even to the lawyers representing the jailed kids. The use of secret facilities appears to be a new tactic put in place by the Trump administration. If that was happening, it was something that I was not aware of. Robert Carey, who led ORR in the final 2 years of the Obama administration, we had pretty exhaustive oversight procedures and monitoring procedures, he added. These systems are in place for a reason. There's an inherent vulnerability in the care for children. Now remember, the Florida settlement, the 1997 court agreement, that the federal government must let attorneys representing jailed children know where each child in ORR custody is being held. It looks like the Trump iteration of ORR did not follow this court mandate because they are above the law. They make up the law, and they impose the order.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Oliver Willis, also of Share Blue Media, brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Trump administration has racked up an embarrassing pile of 63 losses in federal courts over the last 2 years, and experts say it's thanks to rank incompetence and a failure to do the very basic legal legwork of making sure new policies will pass legal muster. In case after case, judges have rebuked Trump's officials for failing to follow the most basic rules of governance, for shifting policy, including providing legitimate explanations supported by facts, and where required, public input, the Washington Post reports. The Trump team has a particularly high failure record in cases involving the Administrative Procedure Act, which the Post describes as a key law that defends against arbitrary rule by the executive branch. And the executive branch and their toadies in the Senate and Congress will probably say, we got to get rid of that. The incompetence even frustrates Trump's conservative allies. Seth Jaffe, a pro-deregulation lawyer working for corporations, said, it's not just that they're losing, but they're being so nuts about it. He added that he thinks the Trump team's mistakes have set regulatory reform back for a period of time. But many of these policies aren't just incompetently written. They're also cruel and harmful. And Trump's own words are often enough to convince a judge of this. In at least a dozen cases, Trump's nonsensical and bigoted comments have been cited in court and used against him. Now, thankfully, Trump's failures in the courts have slowed his attempts to roll back environmental protections and regulations that keep millions of Americans safe. But Americans know the truth, which is why they continually give him losing marks for job performance. Trump promised to hire the best people, but has consistently been unable to attract top talent thanks to his repeated bumbling and overall corruption. The team Trump assembled is losing because Trump has set himself and the country up to fail through poor leadership, just as Vlad had planned it, in this reporter's opinion. All right, we got to get out of here, but we'll be meeting up tomorrow, of course, for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursday. Stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.